Hi. Um, I'm very excited to have a guest with me today. Her name is Khalilah Gambrell. She is a historian with her degree from Boston University, as well as a librarian. So she should be extremely versed on the history of Boston. Welcome, Khalilah Gambrell.
Well, thank you, Yolanda. Happy to be here.
Thank you, thank you. Okay. Well, we're gonna just jump right into this. I have a couple of questions for you that are personal, and then a couple of my research questions. But the first one I was gonna ask you was, what was it like growing up in Boston as an African American?
I grew up in the Boston area in the mid '90s. So, um, eh, at that time, things were definitely different compared to those who may have grown up in Boston. I didn't have the same experiences as those folks that grew up during that time. However, I grew up at a time right after the Charles Stewart, um, um, Carol Stewart murder, that she was killed by her husband, and he blamed a black man for that. And that actually had a tremendous effect on the neighborhood of Mission Hill, which is a part of Roxbury. If you know of Boston, you hear about Roxbury, but the area that actually was impacted the most was Mission Hill, because that's where it occurred, and it really did some damage to the already frayed relations of the Black community in Boston, because Black folks were not that many in Boston. We're very big, very much a minority.
Mhm.
And after that occurred, there was a lot of discussion about how to improve the relationship with Black folks and the institution, because Mission Hill is near a lot of prestigious hospitals like Beth Israel and Brigham and William and Women's.
Mhm.
There's also a lot of discussion about universities like Harvard that owns a lot of property in that area, and other institutions, like how can we build better relationships? And so there were initiatives to help bridge that gap, whether it was Boston College building out a program to encourage more students from that neighborhood to attend their school. It was just greater attention to dealing with the problems, so that what occurred with Charles Stewart and Carol Stewart could not, well, would not be repeated again. We'd remember that and would not put ourselves in that situation, and put the city and a community in that situation. Wouldn't have such a negative perception of that, of a community. We try to be a bit more um, fair, I think.
Okay.
Um, there are also other areas that have also changed too, like South Boston. There are now South Boston is known as being Irish, a predominantly Irish neighborhood. As far as the nation knows, they think of South Boston, they think of busing, they think of Whitey Bulger too,
Right.
but think of busing and then what happens there. But that neighborhood has also become a bit more diverse as well. You
So
see
I'm
business,
guessing that this is also your memory of the events or people that reflect the Black legacy in Boston.
yes,
That would be part of all of that.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Um, how is your identity shaped? How you see Boston and its history?
You know, I see myself as a part of the city. This is my city. This is my community. These are, this is where I live. This is where I've grown up and built a life and a career. Um, um, and that's how I feel about it. Um, but there are times where, from a cultural standpoint, I feel like there are challenges that I don't face if I lived somewhere else, like Washington, D.C., or Atlanta, or some other place. I wouldn't have the same challenges. And what I mean by challenges is that uh, uh, things still seem a bit separated, although I talked about the growth in certain areas, and that people are maybe a little bit, hopefully, acknowledge are more willing to think more about race and building relationships. Still seems a bit segregated in areas. The availability of resources, transportation, uh, 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 grocery stores, things like that. That's still a challenge in this city. Um, I live in an area where I don't have those challenges, but I know that my area is more diverse than other areas. But the areas that are predominantly Black still have the challenges of either bad transportation, not enough, not enough good grocery stores, and support in that way. So
The
for
Black
me,
communities.
go, yeah, definitely. Just don't have the same accessibility that I have living in another area, and I have that because I actually, have a position or occupation where I can afford to have to live here, live in a certain area. I live in Jamaica Plain,
Okay.
but many
Oh,
areas,
in
many
Boston.
Black, yeah, yeah, many Black folks just don't have that. There's still that segregation. So things have improved, things are better. We've had a Black female mayor, Kim Janney. The city council is far more diverse than it has been. But yeah, it still feels challenged, and it feels like I sometimes I feel like I miss out because I don't live in another area that has uh, more when it comes to Black identity and culture.
Okay. That's very fair. Um, Now, let's see. Have you seen changes in how African American contributions have been recognized in Boston over the years?
Yeah, and when I was thinking about this question, I mentioned about Kim Janney being the first uh, Black mayor
Mhm.
of Boston, which is huge if you
Right,
think about it. And some people say, "Dang, it took this long," you know.
right.
Um, but it was big. And like I mentioned about the city council, it's definitely more diverse. Um, but I think one of the big things that I was looking at that question was some of the ways they've tried to recognize Black folks over the past year. One was the Bill Russell statue. Now, Bill Russell was the most prolific Celtic of all time, won 12 championships, I think 11 or 12 championships. I think like 10 of them as a player. I think one or two as a player coach. He coached and played at the same time and
Oh,
won
wow.
championships. And Larry Bird got a statue. Red Auerbach got a statue. This man who won more championships than Larry Bird and is the reason that Red Auerbach got the statue in the first place, never had a statue. And it took and when he was here, he suffered he has several racist incidents happen to him. It took until I think 10 or maybe 10 or so, maybe a little bit more than 10 years ago, because it took President Barack Obama, to say, "Hey, Bill Bill Russell deserves a statue." It took that statement from Barack Obama from them to finally build a statue for this man. For all he did for the Celtics, it finally got a statue. And, so that's a reflection of how things have changed and how those types of contributions are being
Right.
recognized. Two more I'll bring up. Um, Martin Luther King spent a pivotal time of his life in Boston. He went to Boston University. He attended their theological school to get a PhD. I believe that was a PhD. Uh, and his papers are actually at Boston University. But he met his wife, the late Coretta Scott King, here in Boston. He was attending the New England School of Conservatory, and they finally built a statue. It's called the Embrace. It's right in the middle of Boston Common, and that was again it happened 2 3 years ago. A critical recognition of Dr. King, and that statue also not only is a celebration of Dr. King, but it also celebrates other civil rights leaders. Um, that were of Boston, whether it's Bob Moses or Byron Rushing. It's not just about Coretta Scott King and Dr. Martin Luther King. It's about also other civil rights leaders in Boston.
Malcolm X actually lived in Roxbury himself for a
He
while.
did. He did. And they, over a couple, probably 20 something years ago, named a street after him. There's a Malcolm X Boulevard now,
Okay.
in Roxbury. And last one that I'll say is Boston celebrating its anniversary, either the Boston Tea Party anniversary or something along those lines. And last year they actually uh, did they recognized Phyllis Wheatley. So they actually had a program. It ran for about 2 weeks, a program about Phyllis Wheatley and her time in Boston. So those are ways that they're beginning to recognize African American contributions over the years. Long time in coming, but it's finally coming along.
So what does this mean to you personally?
Well, there's a part of me that says, well, it's about time, but it makes me also think, well, the tide is turning. People are learning. They're beginning to understand about, more about Martin Luther King. Everyone thinks they know Martin Luther King. Some of us our age may think, well, of course everybody knows about Martin Luther King. No, the young people don't. They may not know about Coretta Scott King and what they did, or those other civil rights leaders that are now recognized at that Embrace statue. So for me, I'm hopeful because these contributions and how they're being represented now is allowing younger people to learn and understand. Without these, they don't know anything. They may not, it may just, it's not on the phone, so they're not aware.
Right.
But, when you're passing by the statue, you have to ask, well, what's this about? And understand it. And you see the names that are displayed. At least you have it in your head, and that's a good thing.
Okay. So, the Embrace is a significant African American historical landmark in Boston. Are there any others that you can think of?
Um, well, there is a statue of Phyllis Wheatley that's in the South End area of Boston. Also in the South End, if you're walking alongside Massachusetts Avenue, there's actually a plaque that says Martin Luther King lived here. As I mentioned, yeah, 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 yeah.
I didn't know
It's
that.
yeah, yeah. It's if you're familiar with Boston, there's Wally's Cafe, and it's not that far from Wally's Cafe. It's just a small little. He lived in a brownstone. It's just, hey, he lived here when he was in Boston.
I didn't know that. Okay.
Yeah, yeah. So those are some of some things I'm thinking off the top of my head as statues of this. There's also markers that represent, like you mentioned, like Malcolm X, that he was from this area. We have the Reggie Lewis Center. Reggie Lewis was a basketball player for the Boston Celtics who uh, passed away. And they have the center there, and that's where a lot of track meets happen. And it has become like a community place to go for events as well. Um,
So
so that,
you,
Go ahead.
I'm sorry, I don't mean to interrupt.
No,
Uh,
no.
can you think of a few key African American figures in po in political or civil rights other than you said Malcolm X, you said Martin Luther King, Coretta Scott King. Actually, you know what? I think that's plenty. Um,
Well, one of the things I was going to bring up this is probably more along the lines of some of the research questions. Um, if we want to go long time ago, so one of the things to know is Boston was the hub of the abolitionist movement, the anti-slavery movement, and so there were folks like Frederick Douglass who would come here and speak to fellow abolitionists, whether it was um, uh, um, Garrison or others. Um, In addition, there was this book, this appeal by a Black man who lived in Boston in the 1820s, who's an abolitionist named David Walker. And he wrote this infamous publication called David Walker's Appeal. And that was one of the first pieces of literature by a Black man that was against slavery. He talked about the evils of slavery, and it was actually banned in certain states in the South. It was banned. Um, but it was one of the it really caused it really for many people started that anti-slavery abolitionist movement, and it was started by a Black man who lived in Boston.
Excellent.
Um,
Excellent.
yeah.
That's amazing. Um, are there any African Americans who contributed to the economic development throughout the 20th century?
Well, we had a governor by the name of Deval Patrick.
Hmm.
He was a governor for 8 years and helped during a very great economic period of Massachusetts. That's one of the first things I was thinking of,
Hmm.
and also the Senator Edmund Brooke, a Black man who also helped too. Trying to think of other areas, like if we don't talk about politicians who bring funding, like where who helped in those areas. I mean, I think a lot of people think about there's a restaurant, a soul food restaurant in Roxbury called that was called Bob the Chef,
Right, right.
and that the owner of it, well, the person who was the owner, Daryl, has helped. Daryl Settles,
Hmm.
built it as a cornerstone. People love to go there. It's not there anymore. It's been replaced by a jazz cafe.
Hmm.
Yeah, it's there. It's called Daryl's the
Okay.
Jazz Cafe. It might be now something else, but they replaced it, Bob the Chefs, many years ago with that. And but he has also been a person who's been a proponent of building, either through real estate or other means, helping Black folks prosper in Boston.
Okay.
That's the only person I can think of off the top of my head.
Okay. And this is my final question for you. How have African American communities in Boston responded to the challenges like segregation or gentrification? I know that's a big one, right?
That is, but I mean, from as far as segregation goes, I mean, Boston for forever will be known as this city that is kind of a paradox, right? We're the city about freedom. We had all the, if you think about the Revolutionary War and what led to it, those events, where it was the Boston Tea Party, the Boston Massacre. Oh, I forgot about Crispus Attucks. You know, um, and other events that happen in Boston or outside of it, or Lexington or Concord, were known as the city about freedom. Uh, and uh, and then with the busing, it exposed, well, there might be an exception to the rule, you know, and for the nation to see the paradox here. And so I think this is still a challenge, a very big challenge. And I mentioned early on about what happened with Charles Stewart and Carol Stewart and how that further exposed that.
Mhm.
Um, I think it's still a challenge. And this that's just that we still struggle with. And it definitely has become worse with gentrification, because what gentrification is doing is it's pushing people, because basically Boston's a very small city. It's not DC, like it's huge. So DC's this and Boston's this.
Right.
And so because of that, people need to be here, want to be here, whether it's because of all the colleges that are here or the medical or the biopharm companies are here. Everyone still wants to be here. So what's happening is people are buying homes in areas, maybe areas that were typically known as a Black area or a person of color or a people of color area, and they're pushing out.
Right.
And then the rents are so high because there's such scarcity in housing, pushing people out. They can't afford it, can't afford to live
Awesome.
here,
All right.
you know. So it's how have we responded to it? I don't think we've responded to it very well at all. It gets if I think if you talk to people, it's getting worse in the sense of gentrification because it's just it causes a segregation because folks are moving into other areas if they have to. But it's also it doesn't allow people to stay in the city they love. They have to move out, which makes it harder for them to keep their jobs, in the sense that the jobs are here in the city, but they have to use public transportation to
Right.
get
Right.
there. The access to hospitals. We have the best hospitals in the world. But if you've been pushed out to places like uh, you know,
Brockton.
yeah, yeah, places like that, you then don't have the access to the medical care you used to have, or even access to programs that colleges or universities offer people that are in their neighborhood. You don't have access to that anymore.
Because they're not in the
So
neighborhood any longer.
yeah, so it's definitely had a tremendous impact. So for all the things that have been positive that I've said, like from a political standpoint, some of the gains we've had and some of the fact that we're embracing, some of the legacy of our past of African Americans, we we're still challenged in this area uh, of segregation and gentrification.
Thank you so much,
Mhm.
Khalilah, for spending the time to answer these questions for me. I really appreciate it. And I will send you a copy of this when we're done. Thank you again for so much for all of your help.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you, Yolanda, and have a blessed day.